There's recently been an outbreak of mushroom poisonings happening in California, and even some deaths associated with this. An unreasonably high amount of people have been getting sick from eating the wrong mushrooms. So on this episode, I want to get into the reasons why this huge poisonous mushroom outbreak is happening. Thanks for joining this episode of Mushroom Wonderland.
Welcome to Mushroom Wonderland.
My name is Aaron Hilliard. I'm a mycology educator from Kitsap County, Washington. There have been a lot of hospitalizations since mid-November through current day. Foraging mushrooms has been around since the dawn of man, and a lot of people have died along the way from eating the wrong mushrooms. And usually when we're talking about toxins in mushrooms, we're talking about GI distress, so just really bad stomach cramps, vomiting, diarrhea, that sort of thing. But about 3 to 5% of mushrooms can actually kill you, and that is what's happening in California right now. People are mistaking Amanita phalloides for a variety of different edible mushrooms, and they are eating these poisonous mushrooms, getting violently ill. There have been some liver transplants. There's been 4 deaths and a huge outbreak of hospitalization. So what is causing this massive poisoning epidemic that we have going on? Is it really because the mushrooms are having a good year? I mean, Amanita phalloides in that area, in the Bay Area and northward in Northern California, is known for having death cap mushrooms. They're not new. They grow there every year. They seem to be popping up everywhere, but that shouldn't encourage people to be eating more mushrooms. So what is it really? Mushrooms are kind of a hot topic right now. A lot of people are taking to the woods and foraging and learning about eating edible wild mushrooms. Most of the people who are getting poisoned are not Americans. These are usually immigrants coming from different areas, and they're mistaking the death cap mushrooms. Then they go out and forage them and eat them and feed them to their family and get into big trouble. Amanita phalloides is the mushroom responsible for these mushroom poisonings, and it is responsible for 95% of all mushroom related deaths. It is highly toxic. There's no way to cook or freeze or dry the poison out of these mushrooms. It's a very stable toxin known as amatoxin. So the death cap mushroom is typically found with oak trees or imported European hardwood trees. They landed on the eastern seaboard probably 200 years ago, and now they have colonized all the way across America and the West Coast, and they can be found all the way up here in Seattle and even north into British Columbia. There really is no way of eradicating death cap mushrooms. You can mow them, or you can pick the fruiting bodies and toss them into the trash, but the fungus itself lives underground on the tree roots, and so just by plucking the fruit, you are not going to kill the underground mycelium. So in this way, it's really hard to destroy a patch of death cap mushrooms or to make it safer for people. So you have to have a pretty good knowledge of each and every individual mushroom that you're picking, and that means identifying the poisonous ones as well as the edible ones. I always tell people to start with an edible mushroom that's easy to identify, like a chanterelle. Chanterelles have very few lookalikes. The lobster mushroom is another really good one, and chicken of the woods is another really good one. When we're getting into the gilled mushrooms like Amanita, which have gills underneath the cap, that's when things can get a little bit dangerous. If you've ever noticed a portobello from the store or a button mushroom has dark colored gills, if you flip it over, it has those paper-like structures underneath, and they're dark chocolate colored in maturity. Amanita have similar looking gills, but they never turn dark chocolate color. They always stay white. And so these white gilled larger mushrooms can be a little bit of a red flag, because some of these Amanitas can be edible. Some of them are a choice edible, but only for experts to be picking, and then some of them are quite deadly. So let's have a look at Amanita phalloides. This mushroom is what we consider a medium to large size mushroom. They can grow up to 7-inch wide caps. They can be about 8 to 10 inches tall, but their morphology varies quite a bit. They're a dingy brown color with the white gills that I just mentioned. And as you go down the stem, there's usually a skirt, or what we call an annulus, hanging on the stem. This is also a red flag. When you see those white gills and you see the annulus, you have checked 2 boxes on the way to a potentially dangerous mushroom. And as you go below the annulus, or the ring on the stipe, that's what we call a stem on mushrooms, at the very base of the death cap and its allies is going to be what's called a vulva. So this is a sac-like structure that the mushroom actually erupts out of. It looks like an egg when it's young, and that makes hunting for puffballs potentially dangerous because a small Amanita egg can look a bit like a puffball. But when the Amanita inside of this little egg starts to mature, it's going to bust out of that egg, and the eggshell remnants, if you will, are left behind at the base of the mushroom, and this is called a vulva. So if you have a medium to large size mushroom with white gills, an annulus or a skirt hanging on the stem, and then especially this vulva on the bottom, or this egg-like sac that it's growing out of, those are some serious red flags. You're probably looking at a deadly Amanita. So the Amanita phalloides, which is known as the death cap, and then its allies, which is a group of about 6 or 7 different more white colored Amanitas that look very much like the death cap, only more pale. These are known as the destroying angels, and they all contain amatoxins. They're all in a section of Amanita known as Amanita section phalloideae, and these can all potentially kill you. Back in the day, before modern medical techniques and liver transplants, if you accidentally ate some of these mushrooms, you would almost surely die. One of the popes actually died from accidentally eating death cap mushrooms. The emperor of Rome was poisoned by his wife by death cap mushrooms. And more recently in the news, a lady fed a beef Wellington laden with death cap mushrooms to her ex-in-laws at a luncheon and killed 3 of those family members, and a 4th one had a liver transplant and barely made it alive. So poisoning by these mushrooms is nothing new. People have known about this for a long time. So you have to be careful when you go out foraging for mushrooms. One thing I always tell beginners is find a mushroom that's easy to identify and start with that one, and make sure that you really understand it before moving on to the next mushroom. There are a few kind of more popular mushrooms that could be mistaken for a death cap. I suppose Agaricus is a genus, and that's the same genus that the button mushroom and the portobello are in. And there are some wild Agaricus species that are good to eat. And these ones are usually going to have a pinkish colored gill when they're young, and then they turn chocolate brown because the spores are this dark brown color, where the Amanita's gills always stay white. In Southeast Asia, they have a mushroom called the paddy straw mushroom, or Volvariella, and I've heard that they also cultivate it down in Mexico and Central and South America, which could also be confused for the death cap because it also has white gills and it also grows out of a vulva, which could be very misleading. The paddy straw mushroom is definitely a mushroom that I would discourage new foragers to go out and look for. Even experienced foragers could potentially mistake the Volvariella with the Amanita phalloides. So if you're into picking paddy straw mushrooms, please make sure you know what you're doing. Maybe this isn't the best year. And if you just moved to America and you want to eat some delicious mushrooms, only eat cultivated paddy straw mushroom. I think that the solution to this problem is going to be education. People need to know the dangers of going out and hunting mushrooms. And if you're picking mushrooms that could potentially look like another deadly mushroom, you especially need to take care. I know that the news outlets and the media and the government in California is discouraging people from wild mushroom foraging altogether, but I can assure you it's not that dangerous if you know which mushrooms you're looking for. If you're going out indiscriminately picking mushrooms and just shrugging and saying, yeah, I think this looks like a good one, you could be in for some real trouble. Last night I talked to Dr. Brian Perry, PhD mycologist from Cal State East Bay, right in the area where all these poisonings are happening, and he's afraid that we're going to see more of these as we go into the Caesar Amanita season. So there's a Caesar Amanita that's a really choice edible that grows in California and is popular to pick, but again, it should really only be for very experienced foragers only, but it can grow in the same areas that the death caps can grow in. So sometimes when people are picking young Caesar Amanitas, they'll end up with Amanita phalloides in their basket. So I don't know if we're out of the weeds yet. We might see some more poisonings on the horizon. The thing is, we just have to educate. We have to let these immigrant communities know. We have to let new foragers know that there are deadly mushrooms out here, and they're having a really good year this year. So they seem to be everywhere in California, and you have to be extra vigilant if you're going to go out foraging for wild mushrooms. Hopefully this was a little bit enlightening. You got an idea of what a death cap mushroom mushroom looks like and you take a little bit of extra care when you go out into the field, I wouldn't discourage people from foraging mushrooms altogether, but I really do want to encourage people to start with mushrooms that they know, as well as get familiar with the poisonous mushrooms out there so that you can avoid them. So thanks for joining me on this short episode of Mushroom Wonderland, and I hope you're safe out there. Much love, everyone. Peace out.